Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My dear students, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. This is part 2 of my video lecture on state territory. And in part 1, I was discussing about Taranalayas, the concept of Taranalayas, and the leading case of Western Sahara case. And then this in the Western Sahara case, what was the decision of the ICJ? ICJ decided that the Western Sahara was inhabited with people who are, even though they are nomadic, they are socially and politically well organized in tribes and under chiefs, leaders, competent to represent them. So that's why they could not be regarded as Ataranalayas, meaning that the territory of Western Sahara was not Ataranalayas at the time of the Spanish occupation, Spanish colonization, and no state can occupy Western Sahara, even though Morocco argued that they occupy the Western Sahara, cannot occupy because it was not Taranalayas. They have people. There are people in Western Sahara, and they are also entitled to right of self-determination. That's the final decision of the ICJ in this case was that the peoples of Western Sahara are entitled to right of self-determination. They have the qualities of people who are entitled to self-determination, and that's why they can decide their own political, social, and cultural matters. So they have this right. So this is 2 points. This case refers to 2 points. The first point is it is not Ataranalayas because the people are socially and politically well organized. There are people. And secondly, the people are entitled to right of self-determination. They can determine their own future, their own political status. Okay, they have the right of external self-determination. This is the decision in Western Sahara case. Now we move on to the second basic requirement of occupation. Occupation must be effective. We call it effective occupation. Occupation, to be valid, must be effective. So international law, as you all know, international law is ever developing. That's why international law in the past, in the 16th, 17th century, and international law in the modern contemporary period, that is in the 20th and 21st century, they are different. There are differences. So we look at the international law, the situation of international law in the 16th century. The meaning of effective occupation was interpreted very liberally. At that time, mere discovery, Columbus discovered America, right? So this discovery alone gave a state an inchoate title. Inchoate title here means an option to occupy the territory within a reasonable time, and during which time no other state are allowed to occupy the territory. This is called inchoate title. We have at least inchoate title. So mere discovery may create an inchoate title to the territory. So the requirement is just very, very simple and very liberal, very flexible. But in the contemporary international, the modern international law, the requirements of effective occupations have become very strict now. Okay, now, so that we have to compare the two international law. International law in the past, especially in the 16th century, and international law now in contemporary international law, this 20th and 21st century international law. Now, what is the status of the position of contemporary international law to be effective occupation? According to contemporary international law, to be effective occupation, the two elements must be fulfilled. What are the two elements of effective occupation? Number one, animus, intention. Intention to act as sovereign. Intention to act as sovereign. And number two, corpus occupandi or factum. Factum, the factual situation, the actual conduct of the state. Peaceful and continuous exercise of sovereign authority over the territory. First, animus, intention. The intention is intention to act as sovereign. Secondly, factum. Factum is the actual conduct of the state. What is the actual conduct? peaceful and continuous exercise of sovereign authority over the territory. These are the two elements of effective occupation, and whenever you have to answer questions on occupation, you have to see whether these two elements are fulfilled or not. Now, before going to that, in both elements, we see the term sovereign, intention to act as sovereign, peaceful and continuous exercise of sovereign authority. So that's why the preliminary question here is, who can acquire title to territory? The answer is very simple: a sovereign state. A sovereign state, because this is exercise of sovereign activity, not an ordinary private person can do that. So that's why only a sovereign state can acquire territory under international law, not a private person. It is a sovereign act. Occupation as a sovereign act, a private person cannot acquire territorial sovereignty by means of occupation without the express authorization or subsequent confirmation or ratification of a state. Meaning that the exception, there is an exception. The exception is that the state must have expressly authorized that person to acquire the territory on behalf of the state. So that person will be the delegate, the representative of the state, and got the authorization from the state to occupy, or later subsequent confirmation or ratification by the state. So that's why finally it boils down to the state. It is the exercise of sovereignty. That's why individual cannot do that. But even though individual will do that, then he must be expressly authorized by the state, or he must be subsequently confirmed or approved by the state of his act by the state, because this is the state sovereign act. And this is confirmed in Anglo-Norwegian fisheries case. The independent activity of private individual is of little value unless it can be shown that they have acted in pursuance of a license or some other authority received from their governments, or their governments have asserted jurisdiction through them. So they are the agent. They are the agent. The government authorized them to do on behalf of the state. Then only they can go and acquire or occupy territory, but on behalf of the state, as agent of the state. Okay. So now we move on to the first element, intention to act as sovereign. Intention, animus. So, but you know very well this intention is a mental element. So how can a mental element intention be proved? So mental element can be proved only by physical fact. Physical fact means only by conduct. So that's why normally intention can be presumed from the simple fact that the state is exercising such sovereign authority over the territory. It can be proven only by conduct. So I will give a few examples of how intention can be proved, especially in territories where extensive display of authority is not possible. It is enough to prove the sovereign intention by means such as, the first example is number 1, the publication of notice of sovereignty in journals. This is laid down in the Clipperton Island arbitration. I will later on discuss this later. Clipperton Island arbitration. Number 2, the declarations stating the application of national laws to Greenland by Denmark. Declaration of application of national law or national legislation to a certain territory. This is also an example of intention to exercise, to act as sovereign. Intention to act as sovereign. National legislation. This is laid down in Eastern Greenland case. These are some examples of how to prove sovereignty by means of acts, by means of conduct only. Okay? By means of conduct only. By means of exercise of sovereign activity itself, intention can be proved. Now the second element, which is the most important element, because even the first element, intention, can be proven by the actual conduct of the second element. So that's why the second element is the decisive criterion. Peaceful and continuous exercise of sovereign authority or sovereign activity. Peaceful and continuous exercise of sovereign authority. the leading case on this point is Palmer's Island case, which was decided by Judge Huber, which is a sole arbitrator in this case. And this is the often cited cited clause from the award of the arbitration. The continuous and peaceful display of territorial sovereignty, peaceful in relation to other states, is as good as a title. So continuous and peaceful display or exercise of territorial sovereignty. Peaceful here means in relation to other states. In relation to other state means no other state is given problem or creating problems or challenging or objecting to this exercise of sovereignty. There is no objection, no challenge by other states. This is the meaning of peaceful. This is as good as a title. If you have a state can prove that it is exercising continuous and peaceful exercising sovereign activity, then that state got the title. This is as good as a title. Okay. So that's why to be an effective occupation, the exercise of sovereign authority must be peaceful and must be continuous. It must be continuous until the critical date and to be governed by the intertemporal law. So there's 4 sub-elements or 4 points we have to take note of. Number 1, peaceful. Number 2, continuous. Number 3, until the critical date. And number 4, to be governed by the intertemporal law. So these 4 sub-elements or 4 points I will discuss one by one. Number 1, peaceful. What is meant by peaceful? Peaceful exercise of sovereign authority. Peaceful in the sense that it is not challenged by other states. There is no protest, no challenge, no objection by other states. But only one protest only and then no more protest at all. This is not enough. There must be some protesting, some consistent protestation. So that's a consistency in protestation over a long period, if not rebutted by the claimant state, may disturb the peaceful character of the display of state authority. This is the meaning of peaceful. Now, number 2, continuous. What is meant by continuous? Continuous of exercise of state authority and the critical date. The first, continuous exercise of state sovereignty, sovereign authority, or continuity. So this exercise of sovereignty must not be established by once and for all display of state authority. It must not be only once and for all. It must not only once only exercise, show the exercise of sovereign activity. Then later on, there is no more exercise of sovereign authority. This is not enough. So to be continuous, number 1, the display of state authority must be ongoing. It must be an ongoing process. And number 2, the display of state authority must exist up to the critical date. So that's why now the importance of critical date comes. So the exercise of sovereign authority must exist up to the critical date. So critical date is important, and the exercise of sovereignty must be until up to the critical date. So then, the third point is, what is the critical date? The critical date. It is the date on which the location of territorial sovereignty is decisive. The decisive date. The date on which location of territorial sovereignty is decisive. And normally, it is the date of the origin of the dispute. Normally, it is the date of the origin of the dispute. It means when 2 states making rival claims of sovereignty over the territory. When? What is the time? When the 2 states are making rival claims of sovereignty over the territory. In the case of Malaysia and Singapore, Malaysia published a map in 1989. And later on, Singapore objected that this is not true. Batu Putih Pulau Batu is not in Malaysian territory. So that date, that is that year 1989, when the 2 countries are disputing over title over the Pulau Batu Putih. This date is the critical date in determining the dispute between Malaysia and Singapore. That's why the state which can demonstrate an effective title in the period immediately preceding in the critical date has the superior claim. So I will discuss in the next